Today we are breaking down, I promise you, the most fun mock draft from a fantasy perspective in the history of mock draft reactions that we've been doing this on the channel for a couple of years. Today we are breaking down our own 3-round NFL mock draft. Yesterday or on Friday, you guys would have seen us break down a first-round NFL mock draft. We're going to go with the landing spot and draft capital from that. And then Danny and I, on our own, basically finish the first 3 rounds, and we're going to use those landing spots, that draft capital, to influence basically what we're going to do in a 3-round Dynasty Superflex rookie mock draft here. We're going to make sure we're not going too long on these players because we got to get through 36 dudes here, but going to be a lot of fun here. A lot of you guys have been requesting this in the comments. Stop using these analyst mocks and do it for fun. This is what we're going to be doing today.
Yeah, and I guess typically from these mocks, we talk about, the talent of the player. And at this point of the year, you guys kind of know our thoughts on the players themselves. But because we actually made the mock, we could talk about how the player's talent actually fits with their situation. So that's probably the frame of mind that we're going to use a lot more, because we can actually explain these landing spots rather than trying to explain maybe what this creator did when he was mocking X player to Y spot.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Danny, you are kicking us off with the 101. And you obviously, if you guys watch Friday's video, know where Danny is probably going here. But what are you doing here?
Yeah, so now there's a lot of buzz that the Raiders obviously are fully interested on Ashton Jeanty. So I feel even more validated at him going at that 106 pick in our mock draft to the Las Vegas Raiders. Why is this such a great fit? In the 5 years that we have seen Chip Kelly run an NFL offense, his teams have been a top 5 team in terms of rush rate. We saw the varied looks, the variety that he had over at Ohio State. And if we know anything about Pete Carroll, he wants to establish the run. Ashton Jeanty with the Las Vegas Raiders is a solid bet to potentially finish as a top 5 rusher as soon as his rookie year.
Yeah, absolutely. They're going to give him the ball like crazy. They're going to throw him the ball like crazy. If you think about the way that Chip Kelly used Trevion Henderson last year at Ohio State, think about back when he was last in the NFL, when they signed DeMarco Murray and used Shady McCoy, and he loves his running backs. And I think Jeanty going 6th overall to the Las Vegas Raiders is probably the betting favorite on the market for where Ashton Jeanty lands. And I do think this is probably going to happen. So again, we're doing this mock obviously for fun. We want to see this and that kind of stuff, but we are not going to just do it completely unrealistic at the same time either. We do think that it is very likely actually that Jeanty does go 6th overall now that they traded for Geno and they're looking to kind of establish a winning culture there in Las Vegas.
Yeah, I mean, they have a solid offensive line now. You have Brock Bowers, Jacoby Myers on the outside. Maybe you add a Tyler Lockett. I think this could be one of the better offenses in the league as soon as year 1. And for Ashton Jeanty's case, if this offense is even above average, we could be looking at a 15-touchdown score.
Yeah, and it's a sneaky good offensive line, too. They've been pretty productive at blowing open holes. They had terrible running backs last year, but last time we saw Jacobs there, he was obviously producing at a high level. So I'm on the board with the 102. Again, you guys should be able to see the first round of our mock draft there, so you can see kind of the direction I might be thinking of going. Cam Ward, of course, goes 101 to the Tennessee Titans. Ted McMillan goes 112 to the Dallas Cowboys. However, I am going to do what you guys probably wanted us to do in our last mock draft, which is take Amari and Hampton 102. And the reason I'm doing it is because in our mock draft, we had the Chicago Bears trading down with the Miami Dolphins and still taking a running back, because the reports out there are that some teams might even prefer Hampton to Jeanty, or at least have Hampton in the conversation as Jeanty. And we both believe that if the Bears have Jeanty 10th overall, they're going to end up picking him. And we know what Ben Johnson was able to do in Detroit with David Montgomery, with Jahmyr Gibbs, he's going to value the running game, value his, running back position. We saw Gibbs go a lot higher in the draft than we expected him to go when he was coming out in 2023. And I think we'd all kind of be a little bit shocked by Hampton going 13th overall, but I think this is what Ben Johnson wants to do. And he probably had a hand in taking Jahmyr Gibbs that high.
Yeah, there's a couple curveballs in every draft here, and I thought this was one that was very interesting that I wanted to mix into this mock draft. Was Omarion Hampton going as the clear-cut RB2 within a few picks of Ashton Jeanty because of some of the reports that we've seen. Like you said, with the Bears roster right now, if they traded down a few spots with the Miami, who ended up in that mock draft taking a guy like Will Campbell at 10th overall, well, the Bears have a ton of capital on day 2 to at least have the opportunity to explain the pick. They have the opportunity to make a luxury pick because they filled out their depth on their defense. Their defensive line got added to this offseason. Their secondary was already really good. You already have Ben Johnson, who wants to sculpt the offense in his image. Omarion Hampton is the do-it-all running back. 9.9 RAS, 14th highest of all time. He would fit seamlessly into a Ben Johnson offense.
Yeah, not to mention their biggest weakness, the thing that we would have penciled them in for in the first round was interior offensive line. And they added 2 Pro Bowlers, Jonah Jackson, Joe Tooney in free agency or via trade, and they added the best
Drew
center
Dalman.
on the market in free agency. So yeah, they reworked their interior offensive line. It's kind of, setting up a pick like this where you want to help your young quarterback and you want to help your run game because Ben Johnson has given up on DeAndre Swift once before, and he will probably do it again. So you were on the board with 103. Ted McMillan to the Cowboys, Cam Ward to the Titans. Where are you looking here?
Neither of them. I'm actually looking towards the second overall pick in this draft because we have heard reports that Andrew Berry will play this guy as a full-time wide receiver. He goes number 2 overall, as you see later in the first round, pairs with his college quarterback. We're taking Travis Hunter of the Cleveland Browns in this exercise. And man, I would be ecstatic if I'm able to get this guy at the 103 if he landed with the Browns and we were under the assumption that he would play full-time wide receiver because that is, like I said, what we heard from Andrew Berry himself. Travis Hunter has the opportunity to be one of the 3 to 5 best wide receivers on earth as long as he keeps working at that game, because you watch that guy play, the fluidity that he plays with, the ball skills that he plays with, you see the natural ability to win at all 3 levels. And it's funny because for as good as he separates, no wide receiver should be as good in the air as Travis Hunter is. He is a different caliber athlete. And if you plugged him into the Cleveland Browns situation with his old quarterback, I think he has Odell Beckham Jr. level upside. And maybe if you're a Browns fan, you're hearing, wait, OBJ. No. I'm not talking about OBJ past the ACL tear once he was a little bit washed coming to Cleveland. No, I'm talking about if you drafted OBJ out of LSU in 2014, that level of talent.
Yeah, exactly. And I definitely could have taken him 102. You could have easily made that argument, but a top 15 draft capital running back kind of superseded that, especially going to Ben Johnson for me. But again, this is a nutted mock draft. You're going to be like, oh my God, how did this guy not go higher? And you look at the landing spots, the draft capital of the players that went a little bit higher. And speaking of which, I am going to go in the direction of the quarterback. I think first overall draft capital to the Tennessee Titans here. Again, the Titans, not a perfect landing spot for a quarterback, but you'll see what they did in the second round to help out Cam Ward. We've seen what they've done in free agency so far to add a left tackle in Dan Moore, put J.C. Latham back to his natural right tackle position, who they drafted in the first round last year. Peter Skoronski, they drafted a couple years ago. They invested in Lloyd Cushenberry in free agency a few years ago as well. This is an offensive line starting to take shape. And with Calvin Ridley on one side and Luther Burden, who they took in the second round, on the other side with some good running backs with Tony Pollard and Tajay Spears, this is an offense that Cam Ward can actually succeed in right away. And he has the ceiling, because when we look at, how do these assets develop over the course of their rookie season, Cam Ward has the mobility, has the arm talent to become a late first round, early second round startup pick with a productive rookie season. So that's why I'm leaning him over Tetairoa McMillan, just because of the presence of CeeDee Lamb. CeeDee Lamb kind of caps Ted McMillan's ceiling a little bit from a value gaining standpoint. So that's why I go with Cam Ward over Ted McMillan, but he's absolutely worth this pick as well.
And I mean, another run to the podium spot, we would be selecting Tetairoa McMillan at the 105, a guy that we both have coming into the draft as our 102. But obviously, given how nutted the landing spots were in this exercise, he ends up falling to the 105 here. And listen, if you have the 105 in your drafts, and this is how the draft played out, thank your lucky stars that you got Ted McMillan. Not to mention, it's not like he got a bad landing spot. Like, he landed with the Dallas Cowboys with Dak Prescott, a quarterback that has shown evidence he can throw 35 plus passing touchdowns, nearly 40 plus passing touchdowns in a single year. Tetairoa McMillan, yeah, sure, he's not going to be the one right away, because obviously CeeDee Lamb is one of the 3 to 5 best wide receivers in the league. But to just be a number 2, have a 1,200-yard ceiling, 10-plus touchdown ceiling on this offense, an offense that, if everything is functioning, yeah, maybe it's not the top 3 to 5 unit it was a couple years ago, but should very well be a top 10 unit, assuming Dak's healthy. It'd be an A-plus spot for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And we got some hard decisions to make with these next couple of picks, because the draft capital definitely favors that we go in one direction here, or a couple directions, actually, if you include Warren. But the pre-draft evaluation of some of these other players goes, oh man, I got to pick a Buckeye here based on my pre-draft evaluation of these two guys. Quinshon Judkins, or these 3 guys, even, you can include Henderson in this conversation. Quinshon Judkins goes to the Cowboys 44th overall. Emeka Egbuka goes to the Broncos 20th overall. Travion Henderson joins him in the second round, going to the Broncos as well, giving him kind of that Sean Payton Joker running back. This is a hard decision, man. I think I'm going to lean with the draft capital of Emeka Egbuka here. So I'm going to roll with Egbuka in the first round. He is currently rated as my highest player pre-draft, and getting first-round draft capital to a team that doesn't really have a long-term number 1 receiver. Sutton can be there in the short term. Bo Nix, I very much believe in. So I'm rolling Emeka Egbuka here, going to the Broncos.
Yeah, and I think that's a very sharp pick. Obviously, they do, as we're recording this a couple of days later, they did sign Evan Ingram to a 2-year deal, but at the end of the day, they need a clear, established number 2 wide receiver and a guy that by the end of his rookie season, would we at all be shocked if he supplanted Cortland Sutton as the number 1 there?
No, and that's precisely the
Yeah.
type of situation I would love Igbukah to land in, which is like short term, you get to be the number 2, long term, you get to be the number 1.
Yeah, no, I think that would make a ton of sense now. Now I'm back on the clock, and it is a very close decision for the most part because you could be looking at some of those nutted landing spots. For me, though, I still think the best player on my board would be a guy like Luther Burden going 35th overall to the Titans. You already mentioned the Cam Ward aspect of it. We do think he could be a potential ceiling raiser at quarterback. And based off my evaluation of Luther Burden, you step him in year 1, he's going to be the number 2 to Calvin Ridley. But I think this is a type of spot like Igbukah, where if Burden is the type of talent that I do think he is, he does see his overall utilization expanded in the NFL. Again, that one of the main differences that we had in our evaluation, I thought there was a lot left untapped in terms of his deep ability. That's kind of like the glass half full, glass half empty of a Burden, because if you're high on Burden, you think he could do more than the Missouri film would show. If you're a little bit lower, you're a little bit concerned about the utilization he had in that Drinkowitz offense.
Yeah, and the nice thing for him is that even if he is kind of like a power slot receiver year 1, that can work alongside Calvin Ridley, because Ridley can play the X, he can work downfield, he can take away number 1 corners and give Burden and Cam Ward an opportunity to establish their connection together. And given Ridley's contract, he'll probably be there long term enough so that Burden can develop by year 2, by year 3 to maybe become, the way that Jackson Smith and Jigba and DK Metcalf. At first, we were like, okay, well, JSN's never going to be the number 1 there because DK Metcalf is better than JSN. But as we saw, JSN was so good that he basically got DK Metcalf shipped out of town.
Yeah, 100%. So that was the 3rd wide receiver in a row. You keep the blue train rolling, or you go with the greenback?
No, I wouldn't have taken Burden that high. Just given I have a little bit more questions about Burden, the player, but man, I got to take Judkins here. This is
great pick.
Dallas Cowboys starting running back at 108. Again, these are nutted landing spots. You want to put these guys in any which order. That's the fun of this mock versus some of the other mock drafts that we see. You got the starting running back for the Cowboys, who would probably be, how high does Judkins go in redraft in this situation? He'd probably be a 3rd round redraft pick in this situation. Yeah. So I feel really good that you could make the argument he should have gone even over McMillan potentially. Judkins could have gone that high.
Yeah, no, he's definitely a really good value pick for you here. I consider him a lot at the 107 spot. I think between him and Burden was a tough decision for me. I do have to go a little bit more back on my pre-draft evaluations of both players. Did have Burden as my 104 entering the draft, which in a solid landing spot, in my opinion, with the Titans is kind of why I went that direction. But I am back here at the 109. And like you said, you could go with a guy like Trevion Henderson, very nutted landing spot going with the Broncos here. We do still have a guy like Matthew Golden on the board getting 8th overall draft capital. That would probably be where my decision is. And I do have Matthew Golden slightly higher. Plus, I will respect the top 10 overall draft capital. He's a 3-level separator. And there's actually a report that came out from Dave Canales that they've tackled all of their needs. And the one need that he cited in that report was a more speedy, explosive offense. Matthew Golden would completely adjust that aspect to their offense as soon as he lands there from day one. Obviously, you have the size, Leggett, Coker bringing that size to the table. You get a 3-level separator like Golden. Now you suddenly have one of the best trios in the NFL, in my opinion. Because if all those 3 guys develop, I think they're all 3 really good NFL wide receivers.
Yeah, again, if you don't agree with the Matthew Golden at 8th overall pick, again, this was a mock draft that we did, so you can come at us for that one. But it's more so like what we're hearing. Like, it sounds like Golden is the number 1 receiver on a lot of NFL teams' boards. Like you just said, Carolina would be looking for speed in that avenue. We've seen guys who run in the 4.2s get overdrafted before, with Henry Ruggs going over CeeDee Lamb and Jerry Jeudy and that kind of thing. So Golden, we like his film. We don't love his film. We don't love his profile, but we like it enough to the point that you kind of have to respect the 8th overall draft capital and a landing spot that doesn't really have a number 1 receiver right now. We likely get to develop. We like Jalen Coker to be a good contributor, but Golden could be the number 1 on that team, and Bryce Young has a lot more to work with now than he did before.
Yeah, that's where I'm at with it. Even pre-draft, the late first is about the range that I have for Matthew Golden. But then when you consider the top 10 capital, 8th overall, first wide receiver off the board, kind of props him a little bit to the 8th or to the 9th overall pick.
Yeah, and this next pick would be kind of deciding where would this player end up in startup rankings, because I think the clear 2 best players on the board, just in terms of actually probably 3 best players on the board in overall value right now, are Trevion Henderson going to Denver, which is, what we talked about with Denver last year when they took Bo Nix, great fit. Emeka Egbuka, who they took in the first round of our mock year, great fit. Travion Henderson, second round, great fit. So they're just picking a bunch of great fits here. So that's probably the direction I'm going to go in. But it is worth mentioning that Shedeur Sanders was a first-round quarterback, 24th overall. They trade back up. They take Travis Hunter at second overall, trade back into the first round with the Minnesota Vikings in the mock that we did on Friday, and take his teammate. And they keep Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter playing together. He is not going to be the guy that I go with, though. It is going to be Travion Henderson. I would love to respect the draft capital like you did with Tyler Warren as well, who went 7th overall in this mock. But the tight end position, it's a little bit more boom or bust. Tyler Warren, I have a few concerns about. I'm going to let these guys go off the board before I go into the direction of the tight end. I'm sure we're going to be talking about Loveland and Warren near the end of this first round, early second round, but just a smidge too early for me to just respect the draft capital.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. I'm going to have to make a decision at the 111 here if I want to respect the draft capital versus go with my evaluation, because on one hand, obviously you have the first round 24th overall pick quarterback. On the other hand, the guy that I have from a talent perspective this high actually fell 66 overall to what I'd even argue is maybe even being the most nutted landing spot would be Caleb Johnson. I'm going back and forth here. Between Sanders and Johnson, like in this situation, would you respect the draft capital or would you go with the talent evaluation?
So I'm a little lower on Caleb than you are,
Yep,
so I would respect the draft capital of Sanders personally.
Because I just think 24 overall, you're getting at least 4 guaranteed years with the 5th-year option. You do pair him with his college teammate with Travis Hunter, and what I describe as one of the better situations for a rookie quarterback to land in Cleveland. You have an established play caller. You would add Travis Hunter. You have Jerry Jeudy, David Njoku, very good weapons core. Yeah, I mean, if you're getting a starting caliber quarterback with 4 years of term at the 111 of your draft, I don't think that's outrageous at all.
Yeah, we also add a running back in the third round to them. They maybe bring back Nick Chubb on a cheap deal if he can't find work anywhere else. I'm sure the Browns would probably be motivated to let Nick Chubb come back if he were, because he's Browns royalty at this point. So they'd probably be fine to give him a 1-year deal. Yeah, man. Shedeur, the one landing spot that I do see him working out, because I am definitely lower on Shedeur Sanders than the NFL seems to be, or at least the NFL draft community seems to be in the media. I do think Cleveland is the absolute best landing spot for him, because you need a timing and rhythm-based offense, which Kevin Stefanski runs. You need an offense that stretches the ball down the field and can take advantage of his accuracy, and specifically his deep accuracy, which is what Shedeur Sanders does really well. And that's what Cleveland has asked of their quarterbacks. And they haven't really had, to be honest, a deep, accurate passer. Jameis can't do it. On that short period of time, Flacco was able to do it. Deshaun Watson, not able to do it. So I do think this is the best landing spot for him. I doubt they pick him second overall. Me and you both thought this was a great idea. Pick Travis Hunter at the second overall pick. He's the best player on the board. Minnesota only has 4 total draft picks. They're going to be extremely motivated to trade down. And we both don't really think that Shedeur Sanders is going to go 7th to the Jets or 9th to the Saints or one of these teams. We think Sanders more of a late first round type of prospect. So them trading back up, pairing him with the college teammate makes a lot of sense. Again, this is a nutted mock draft. We tried to put these guys in absolutely the best landing spots that we possibly could for what they do well based on our own evaluations.
Yeah, and I mean, there's still some players on the board, as we'll get into that. I mean, you'd be salivating if they fell anywhere close to the second.
Yeah, and again, you talked about being Caleb Johnson versus, some of the tight ends here. I'm going to respect the draft capital again with the tight ends. My personal evaluation is Colston Loveland over Tyler Warren. Colston Loveland goes 22nd to the Chargers. Again, nutted landing spot. That's the theme of this mock draft. Tyler Warren goes 7th to the Jets. The Jets need some help, both run and pass game, especially Warren is the better kind of blocking tight end of the two of them there. More Y tight end kind of build. I'm going to lean on my evaluation here, even though the 7th overall draft capital is enticing, and I'm going to roll with Colston Loveland over Tyler Warren, because from a fantasy perspective, again, not real life perspective, from a fantasy perspective, I expect more targets to go Colston Loveland's way than Tyler Warren. They're both in a similar situation. You got a, route running number 1 receiver with Garrett Wilson and Ladd McConkey in that situation, but I respect Justin Herbert and the pass volume there a little bit more than Justin Fields and what the Jets will probably be doing from a fantasy perspective. So I'll take Loveland over Warren there at 112.
Yeah, and I'm on the same page there. Obviously, we also have the familiarity there working with Jim Harbaugh, so it would almost feel like from day one he'd be ready to work there with the Los Angeles Chargers, given that fact. But now I'd be on the clock here, and I already mentioned it with the Shedeur pick. It would be between Caleb Johnson and, like you said, from a draft capital perspective, Tyler Warren going 107 to what I would argue is actually a really good landing spot for him with the Jets. The opportunity to be the number 2 target there after Garrett Wilson. And I mean, I'm just going to hope at this point that Caleb Johnson falls to my next pick because I'm going to go with Tyler Warren. It's hard to ignore in a half tight end premium league, a tight end going in the top 10 overall picks.
Yeah, no, it's pretty difficult to ignore that. It's 7th overall draft capital. You got to respect it at a certain point, even if tight ends, quote unquote, aren't the types of guys that you want to draft super high in rookie drafts because, sometimes they take a while to develop, they lose value, so on and so forth. At a certain point, Loveland and Warren need to go off the board by the latest, the early second round, I would say, in most drafts, even if you get, as we got here, nutted landing spots across the board for most of these players. And I am going to whip out a shocker here because I was texting you before this. I know I can get this guy later, but I just really, really want to make a point about this player. Actually, you know what? I'm not going to whip out a shocker. I'm going to wait a little bit because I think it's a little bit too much. I'm going to play in the room right now. I will take Caleb Johnson with 202 going to Kansas City in the early 3rd round. Like you said, this is as good of a landing spot as you can get for Caleb Johnson. You get to presumably share the backfield with Isaiah Pacheco his rookie year, but Isaiah Pacheco is a free agent after this season. Very clearly would indicate that they plan to move towards Caleb Johnson. The best tape of Caleb Johnson does look a lot like a young Kareem Hunt. So this makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, no, I was going to take him at the next pick. He lands here with the Kansas City Chiefs. I think that would be very indicative of both their thoughts about Pacheco. We have heard rumblings from the Chiefs' perspective this offseason that maybe they're not fully bought in on Pacheco being a complete lead ball carrier, which would make sense. If you don't plan on re-signing Isaiah Pacheco, you draft Caleb Johnson this year, he's going to be able to contribute on all 3 downs. And then by this time, 2026, he becomes your bell cow running back.
Yeah, exactly. That's what you have to do in this situation if you're the Chiefs, because Pacheco is a free agent after this year. And I mean, he was coming off a major injury, didn't really look the same. You can't really run back just relying on Pacheco the way that they were doing going into this year. Unfortunately for Pacheco and his dynasty value, when you're a 7th round pick and you get hurt like that, you kind of lost your chance to be like a lead back. Like I think if Pacheco had not gotten hurt this year, he probably has like a top 10, 12 fantasy finish and gets extended potentially by the Chiefs. But that when you're a 7th round pick, you don't have the leeway that they're going to just rely on you again.
Yeah, and at the very minimum, if Caleb Johnson landed with the Chiefs, I could very much envision a similar role to what we saw from Kareem Hunt this year when Pacheco even came back and Kareem Hunt was the lead ball carrier. Like Caleb Johnson has the talent to be a workhorse running back. And if he's able to develop in KC, now you're potentially getting one of the better offenses in the league if Mahomes bounce back.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So what direction are you going in? We got a couple good day 2 quarterback options at the top of the 2nd round. We got a couple good receiver landing spots as well.
Yeah.
Also still have some, especially in the 3rd round, some great running back landing spots. What direction are you going in here?
So as much as I love the running backs in the 3rd round, I do think with each of those landing spots, it's more developmental spots. The guys I'm talking about, obviously Sampson, Tootin, Harvey, we'll Neal. We'll get into a couple of those guys later on in the 2nd. I'd be assuming there is still a receiver at the top here that I think if he landed in this spot has the opportunity to be the number 2 wide receiver right off the bat on this team. And while it would be the 3rd overall weapon in the offense, you plug in Jaden Higgins to the Raiders. He is the exact X wide receiver that Geno Smith would lean upon. Similar dynamic to what we saw in Seattle with the DK Metcalf. Now, Higgins doesn't move as well as Metcalf, although he did run a very, very good 40 by his own standards. If he can play that X wide receiver role, and we know Geno Smith can take shots down the field, he would fit like a glove.
Yeah, they don't really have this archetype of receiver on the team right now, especially if they sign Lockett to play the slot or whatever. Jacoby Myers is, he's a good receiver. He's a good route runner, but he's not really like a go up and get it, work downfield type of guy. Brock Bowers, as much as he's the best player on the team, probably in general, especially on offense, he's not going to be the guy that necessarily works downfield. He's going to move the chains. He's going to generate first downs just like Jacoby Myers. And then with Genty, who we took 106 in the 1st round of this mock draft, you've now kind of completed your offense, quote unquote, for Geno Smith, because what Pete Carroll is there to do is change the culture quickly and win quickly. So you need to get players that are going to impact your offense quickly because he's 70 plus years old and he's only on a 3-year deal.
Yeah, 100%. And it was actually really close between him and the guy that went the next pick. And I'm assuming you're probably leaning that direction here.
Yeah, and I am not leaning in that direction because I wanted to do it over Caleb Johnson and Jaden Higgins, but I'm glad you picked Jaden Higgins because that would have been the one other player that I would have picked over this guy. I am in. I am in, guys. So you guys might not have heard this take from me yet. It's because it's fresh. I'm literally grading him today. Jalen Milroe is the guy that breaks rookie drafts. And I know it seems obvious because he runs the ball for like 900 yards and 20 touchdowns this year. But I'm telling you guys, this dude is more developed as a passer than a lot of people think. I think he is a more developed passer than Anthony Richardson was coming out of Florida, and he was the 4th pick in the draft by the Indianapolis Colts. Jalen Milroe had 27 for 33, 374, and 2 touchdowns with 1 interception that popped off his tight end's hands. It was a perfect throw against the Georgia Bulldogs. He had 18 carries for 113 and 2 touchdowns in that game. He was not sacked. He did not have a single turnover-worthy play. That tape against Georgia and some of the other really good games that he posted this year against LSU, against some of the other SEC schools that we've seen over the past couple of years from Jalen Milroe, it's as good as any quarterback in this class, man. And he reminds me a lot of Justin Fields coming out of Ohio State. He doesn't have the gaudy numbers that Justin Fields had coming out of Ohio State. He also wasn't throwing to Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave. So for me, I look at Jalen Milroe and I think about, can I live with myself if I swing and miss on this prospect? Based on what I've seen from a intangible standpoint, what I've seen from a developmental standpoint, he probably should have went back to school one more year. I get that. But if he gets to sit behind in this situation, probably Aaron Rodgers or Russell Wilson with the Pittsburgh Steelers, we don't know that for sure yet, for a year, for 2 years, dude, this guy could break fantasy football. This guy could legitimately be the next Jaden Daniels type of asset where you take him in your draft and he is untouchable on the open market because of what he does with his legs. I know what Danny is about to bring up. He has bad tape. He has some bad accuracy issues. He fumbled the ball way too much this year and last year as well. Took way too many sacks specifically in 2023. You have some time to clean that stuff up. A lot of the people that I trust think he can, and I agree. When I watch the tape, I'm like, this guy could be a dude, man.
So I liked Malik Willis a couple of years ago, and I learned a lot from that experience. And I mean, kudos to Malik Willis. I mean, he filled in for Jordan Love this year. He actually played decently well for the Packers. I saw firsthand those 2 games that Jalen Milroe had against the Michigan Wolverines, including a game this past year against the Michigan Wolverines B defense, because as we know, Mason Graham, Will Johnson, Kenneth Grant didn't play in that game. Jalen Milroe is a sack-eating machine. And I understand he's got the tools. He's got arm talent. Obviously, one of the most mobile quarterbacks we've seen in college football. I can't get there. And again, who knows? Maybe I watched the film, and like you said, from the Georgia game, I haven't gotten to Milroe yet. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. But from the 2 games that I watched firsthand against Michigan, he didn't look draftable.
I totally get that. I totally get that. You are, for what it's worth, talking about the game in which he took 5 sacks out of his total 23 this year. He was not sacked against LSU. He was not sacked against Georgia. So he was a sack-eating machine in that game, but he was not a sack-eating machine all year. Yeah, he had 44 sacks taken in 2023, but I think that speaks a lot to the fact that he only took 23 this season. And if you remove that bowl game, he only took 18 this season. Like, he actually cleaned up that part of his game, which I think when it comes to quarterback prospects really speaks to their ability to find what they're bad at, get a little bit better in that area, continue to develop. Again, I really wish Milroe had gone back to school, because I think come 2026, he might actually be a quarterback worthy of taking first overall, or at least in the first round by an NFL team. But at the 204, man, you don't get opportunities to get a first round caliber dynasty asset. Like, think about the guys I'm deciding between right now. Jalen Milroe versus the 3rd round running backs that we were just talking about, versus Alec Manor, or versus, some of the tight ends that we're talking about. Their ceilings are nowhere close to Jalen Milroe. If I swing and miss on this pick in this situation, I would be totally fine with it. I think this is a worthy risk worth taking.
Yeah, I mean, both 83rd overall, you can make the case that by the time in 2026, maybe he starts for the Steelers if Aaron Rodgers retires, or Aaron Rodgers goes on a wellness retreat, or whatever the fuck that guy's got going on brewing in his brain. But I just can't get the fact of how inaccurate he looked and how many sacks he was taking against Michigan. But who knows? Maybe I'm a little bit biased in that fact that I saw him in his 2 worst spots.
Yeah, again, you're not wrong to say he was inaccurate in that game. He had his worst completion percentage of any game this year. You're not wrong to say he took too many sacks in that game. He took more sacks than any game this year. But the other games, specifically that Georgia game, I have not seen a prospect play that well against the Georgia Bulldogs defense since CJ Stroud in 2022 in the college football playoff. And if you recall, CJ Stroud that year, people were like, played bad against Northwestern, played bad against X, Y, and Z team. When it mattered, he showed up. And I think that's the important part of when someone shows you they can do it a couple times, and more than a couple times throughout his college career, I'm willing to buy in, especially on a good franchise, good coaching staff like Pittsburgh. I think they can get the best out of him.
I will say one thing you said when it mattered. I mean, those two Michigan games, one in the bowl game, one in the college football semifinal, those games pretty much, I would
They
say,
mattered.
mattered.
They mattered. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
If I've seen it enough times, and even when
Yeah.
it's bad, even when it's going bad, I don't think he like unravels completely. I think he still does some things well. He just makes, his decision making needs to be fixed. Anyways, that was a rant
Yeah.
on Jalen Milroe. I just wanted
Hey,
to get it out there because I am literally currently grading him for our second edition of our draft guide right now, and I wanted to get my thoughts out while they were still fresh.
Hey, and to be fair, I mean, you mentioned with the third round running backs and stuff, like if Jalen Milroe was graded on a running back scale, what running back number would he be in this class?
I don't like that comparison. I think he is a much better quarterback than people think.
But moving off of Milroe, like I mentioned at the Higgins pick, I was between two players that actually went back to back. I was alluding to Jaden Higgins going at 37th in this mock, Alec Manor of the Stanford Cardinal going at 38th overall to the New England Patriots. And that's who I'll be selecting here. When we recorded the mock, it was under the assumption that maybe they go after Cooper Kupp. Now, apparently, those rumors have kind of dialed down a little bit. Sounds like maybe Cooper Kupp is asking for too much to go to New England specifically, which, I mean, Northeast, Massachusetts, maybe he doesn't want to freeze his ass off there. I understand. I mean, we heard Chris Godwin, apparently his ask to New England was 28 to 30 per year. So I guess wide receivers are just taxing the Patriots knowing how desperate they are. I don't know. But regardless, if Manor landed with the Patriots, he would be the one wide receiver on that roster that can play outside for a quarterback that we can very well see unlocking that ability for him to play all over the field. With Alec Manor, he had no free layups with that Stanford offense. I do think with Josh McDaniels running the New England show, with the potential that we know Drake May has, Alec Manor could really be one of the biggest winners of the draft landing in that spot, especially if he can land in a situation where he's almost uncontested for number one targets.
Yeah, I think you could make the argument that New England invested in a similar archetype of receiver with Jalen Polk, but I think Io Manor's athletic ceiling gives him a little bit more of an edge in that area. And also, like you said, Drake May is the type of quarterback who's going to trust his guys. And you could see the Colorado tape in 2023, what happened when the Stanford quarterback trusted like Io Manor against the best corner in the country. And he literally won the game on the final
294.
Yeah. So I understand the pick totally. I think that makes total sense. I'm back on the clock here. I might just play the hits and go right back to the quarterback position because as much as I do really like some of the landing spots of the third round running backs, I think you got to respect 34th overall draft capital to the Giants here with Jackson Dart, who also graded out higher for me than Shadur Sanders. So no offense to Shadur. I think he's definitely a solid quarterback prospect. I'd be willing to spend a late first round, early second round pick on, but he is very scheme specific, which is what I talked about with the Cleveland landing spot. Jackson Dart has better tools than he does. He's more mobile than he is. And he also represents a more creative playmaking type of passer. The range of outcomes for me on Jackson Dart is he has all the best qualities. Let me point this out. Best qualities that Will Levis had coming out of Kentucky, which there was a couple good qualities that he had. He was very tough, very competitive, mobile, had a strong arm. He had some good qualities. He just didn't have the decision-making and the processing and the handling pressure down. And I'm not saying Jackson Dart's perfect in those areas, but he is definitely better than Levis was in those areas. And I think the range of outcomes here is Jackson Dart reminds me of if Bo Nix had come out for the draft 1 year early. That final year at Oregon, he really put it all together and decided in his sixth season, by the way, as a college football starter, he put it all together that final year at Oregon. But he was a good prospect that a lot of people liked after his fifth year in 2023. So Jackson Dart to me is kind of like almost quite to the level of Bo Nix, maybe not quite as accurate as Nix was, but underrated tools, good athlete, can run the ball, has a good arm, A- level tools, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't gotten to my next my Dart evaluation yet. Like I said, I still have to take on the last two quarterbacks. However, I mean, if he goes 34th overall in these two spots with Milroe and with Dart, we're assuming that Russell Wilson and Aaron Rodgers are going to be the two vet quarterbacks in either of those spots. And for a young quarterback to be, maybe taking a step back year one, year two, maybe potentially being the starter, given the advanced ages of both those guys. I actually think they're pretty solid nesting spots, especially when you're considering that Dart will be throwing to Malik Neighbors in this situation. And who knows, maybe by 2026, they add another wide receiver.
Yeah, and I think for both of these guys' development's sake, it would be better that Rodgers goes to the Giants and Russ stayed in Pittsburgh, because I think Jalen Milroe would learn how to scramble with effectiveness from Russell Wilson, whereas Dart would learn some of the nuances of processing from Aaron Rodgers. But again, both learning from guys who are in their mid-30s who played multiple years of football would be good for both of these guys, regardless of their play styles.
But you kind of alluded to it when you got to the dart pick that there are some interesting wide receivers, running backs still available. And I'm assuming I'm just going to be taking my guy and you're going to be taking your guy with these next 2 picks. Dylan Sampson, Tennessee, landing 86 overall draft capital to the LA Chargers. People might be saying in the comment section, well, what about Najee Harris? He just signed to the LA Chargers. 1-year deal, yes, up to $9.5 million, but also has a base level of, I believe, $6.2 million. And the way I kind of see this working out is year 1, we could see a very similar situation to Najee with Jalen Warren in Pittsburgh, where Najee's getting those between the tackles touches, Dylan Sampson operating in space like Jalen Warren did. And eventually by year 2, year 3, we see Dylan Sampson be the workhorse running back on one of the better offenses in the league led by Justin Herbert.
Yeah, that totally makes sense to me. And you just made reference to it. I will, in fact, be taking Byshell Tootin, who is my dude at the running back position. And I absolutely love the landing spot working with Joe Mixon in year 1. You're an explosive young back who needs to learn a couple things, especially about how to run in between the tackles and vision and instincts and being decisive and all that kind of stuff. There's not many vets that you could learn from better than Joe Mixon. It's pretty much what he's made his career on. So I think Byshell Tootin in year 1 can be a third down back, can be a 200-ish touch, maybe 150-ish touch running back behind Joe Mixon. And hopefully by year 2, by year 3, Joe Mixon has retired or moved on to a different team or whatever the case is. So I think Tootin to the Texans would make a lot of sense. And schematically, he also really fits there as well, going with that kind of 49ers-centric scheme that they run.
Yep. I think that would make a ton of sense as well. I mean, you're adding a guy with legitimate 4.32 speed at that size to really learn the basics behind a guy like Joe Mixon. And eventually we do think that Houston in the long term would make sense. I believe the out on Mixon's deal is after this upcoming year. So it would make sense if they got 1 year more out of Mixon, Tootin learns, and then by 2026, he's a bell cow on what's going to be a much improved offensive line, because in this scenario of this mock draft, we did add to the offensive line with the first 2 picks.
Yeah, it's similar to what happened with Benson and Connor last year. Now, that remains to be seen how much Benson picks up from James Conner, but I think by year 2, by year 3, by year 4 of Trey Benson's career, we're hoping that he has learned the things he needs to learn from a veteran like James Conner, and I think Tootin would be in a similar situation.
And I'm back on the clock here at the 2-9. And although there's a couple really interesting second rounders that do go here, there is a running back that I really like going in the 3rd round that I think can supplement that Mark Ingram role we saw from an early career Alvin Kamara. We have Cam Skattebo landing here to the New Orleans Saints. Like we said, Alvin Kamara, I think at this point in his career, he can't be a full 3-down running back. You add in Cam Skattebo, like I said, to kind of supplement those Mark Ingram type of value touches between the tackles that we saw from an early career Kamara. And at this point in Kamara's career, I really do think that could preserve him.
Yeah. With all of these guys, Sampson, Tootin, Skattebo, I think you could argue that they should have gone off the board, 204 through 206 as well. I liked the quarterback, projections because of the landing spots and because of the development possibility there. So again, we did nutted landing spot mock draft here. So a lot of these guys are going to be in really good advantageous positions. And with Kamara, like you said, he's not going to be long for New Orleans. He'll probably be there for another year or 2. I mean, his contract would maybe dictate otherwise, but I think Skattebo would be an early contributor. Kind of limited ceiling for the first year or 2 of his career, but he also gets to learn from one of the best of his generation in Alvin Kamara. So I feel pretty good about that selection there. So I'm back on the clock here, and a couple guys that I'm definitely considering. You got Jack Besh going 40th overall to the New Orleans Saints, Jalen Royals 48th overall to the Chicago Bears. Then you also have Trey Harris, 2nd round capital, 54th overall to the Packers, and a couple more 3rd round running backs with Devin Neal, DJ Giddens, so on and so forth. I am going to lean towards the guy that I feel the best about ceiling wise, which probably would be Trey Harris, given that there's not a whole lot of high-end wide receivers on the Packers. Whereas with Jalen Royals, for example, who had a similar grade to Trey Harris, you got to compete with Odunze, you got to compete with DJ Moore. They want an X receiver or a number 1 outside wide receiver there. And I think the best of Trey Harris does look like a number 1 receiver. You just got to develop that out of him.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a very worthwhile spot. And like we know, that's kind of the tier here at wide receiver. Now, like you said, I technically do have a guy in Jalen Royals graded higher than a guy like Jack Besh. But then when you consider the draft capital, when you consider, like you said, the immediate opportunity for playing time, I think is key. I think Jack Besh has the opportunity to instantly be the wide receiver 2 for the Saints. Whereas with Royals, as much as I love the talent, he still will be behind Odunze and DJ Moore, at least in year 1, possibly year 2. With Jack Besh, like I said, playing that power slot role with that Kellen Moore offense, the most similar wide receiver, I would say stylistically to Jack Besh that we've seen work with Kellen Moore is actually Keenan Allen. And Keenan Allen, similar size profile, 6'2", 210 pounds, not your 4'4" burner, but kind of more of your 4'6" tough yards after catch wide receiver. I think Besh would be a very, very good complement to Shaheed and Olave on the outside.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with that take at all. I think Best should be a really good one. I'll leave you Jalen Royals because I want to go with a guy that I really believe in. And also, full disclosure, you might be like, oh, where's Ollie Gordon? Where's Damian Martinez? Where's X, Y, and Z player? We're only doing the third round. The top 3 rounds of our mock draft, we're only taking players from that. So if the guy hypothetically went 4th round to a good landing spot, yeah, maybe he would factor in here. But we're just going to rely on the players that are in this mock draft. Devin Neal to the Browns makes total sense, man. You need an early down ball carrier to replace Nick Chubb. Not saying Devin Neal is Nick Chubb. He definitely isn't. But he can be a reliable early down ball carrier for you. If you let Nick Chubb walk, you go him and Jerome Ford the change of pace. Devin Neal kind of the early down guy.
Yeah, no, I think that'd make a ton of sense. Neal is just one of those projections where you realize, okay, maybe the ceiling isn't that of like, oh yeah, is he ever going to be a top 5 to 8 running back in fantasy? Not necessarily, but if you told me there was a stretch of time where he was the RB16 in points per game from weeks 10 to 17, I wouldn't be at all shocked because of his all-around skill set that he brings to the table.
Yeah, he's kind of like somewhere on the Javonte Williams, Marlon Mack spectrum where you're going to get good fantasy production out of him if he's in a good landing spot, but he's probably not the type of guy that an NFL team would be very comfortable paying a lot of money to on a second contract. But if they hit on his rookie contract, they'll be like, okay, yeah, we'll use that production for 3-4 years.
Yeah, that's kind of where I agree with him as well. You mentioned Jalen Royals. I will be selecting him here at the 301. I understand the immediate opportunity wouldn't be there in Chicago, but I do think the skill set that he has, the ability that he has, the opportunity that he has to be able to work in space in a Ben Johnson offense, I don't think it's at all out of the possibility that he can even establish himself up that depth chart, especially if this offense is humming at all capacity with Caleb Williams really developing.
Yeah, absolutely. Now that we're in the 3rd round, I do think this is the part where I feel comfortable digging on these, Mason Taylor tight ends, the Elijah Arroyos. We didn't actually have Harold Fannin going in the first 3 rounds of this mock because he's a little bit of a tweener. Don't really know how NFL teams really feel about him. But yeah, there's a couple guys that I feel good about here. I am going to take DJ Giddens first, and then I'll probably go back to the tight end position with maybe my next pick. DJ Giddens gets to learn behind Aaron Jones. I mean, exceptional athlete, as we saw at the combine. Minnesota is a great scheme fit for him. He just kind of needs to learn the nuances of the position, like we said for Tootin and some of the other guys there. But Aaron Jones on a 2-year deal, which is effectively a 1-year contract and guarantees, I think makes a lot of sense. Giddens is still very young, can contribute on 3rd down, explosive runner, and also has the upside to potentially carry a 3-down workload if he develops.
Yep, and I'll go straight back to the board and take Jalen Knoll to the Jacksonville Jaguars here, 70th overall draft capital out of Iowa State. I technically haven't formally graded him yet, but I do know that when I watched Higgins, he did stand out in certain plays, and I do know in terms of how he fits schematically next to Brian Thomas Jr., he is almost the perfect complement to take on that Christian Kirk role.
Yeah, that makes total sense to me as well. I am going to go in the direction of one of these tight ends. I think Arroyo has the better spot for sure. 100th overall to the Los Angeles Rams, more upside for targets and whatnot. But you do have Adams, you do have Puka there. I'm going to roll with Mason Taylor. I'll respect the draft capital there. 45th overall to the Indianapolis Colts. Seemingly, we've been mocking a tight end to them for years, and I do think they'll get their guy here.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good fit as well. They need another established pass catcher at the tight end spot. And Mason Taylor showed even from his true freshman year at LSU that he can really contribute in that capacity. I still remember in his true freshman year, him scoring that game-winning touchdown against Alabama in overtime. So big shout out to Mason Taylor. I will be back on the clock here. I like RJ Harvey going to the Rams at the 90th overall pick. We have heard reports all offseason that Sean McVay stylistically wants to add a different type of runner to this backfield, cited specifically the Tampa Bay dynamic between Rachaad White and Bucky Irving. And I can see a lot of NFL teams, I understand he's older, he's going to be 25 years old, and a lot of NFL teams kind of seeing a little bit of Bucky Irving to RJ Harvey's game.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me as well. I'm going to roll to the wide receiver position. We still have 2 second-round wide receivers on the board, and I'm going to roll with Restrepo with this pick because Restrepo goes to the Commanders. Debo Samuel's a little bit older, Terry McLaurin a little bit older, and also, too, just from a on-field schematic perspective, you can use him in the slot, and those guys can play on the outside.
I mean, what a steal. You got Cooper Kupp plus Ladd McConkey at the 306. That's unreal.
Yeah, and what Danny's referencing is a tweet by Kirk Benkert, who said he's Cooper Kupp plus Lad McConkey, which is, I mean, a little bit hyperbolic for sure. I liked what I saw of Restrepo. I haven't formally
Yeah.
graded him yet, but when I was watching
No,
Cam
he's a
Ward,
good
he definitely
player.
made a lot of plays.
He's a good player for sure. That I just was laughing when I saw that. That's like, okay, like take it easy. But speaking of, I mean, we do have 100th overall draft capital. You mentioned watching Cam Ward, Elijah Arroyo here of Miami going at 100th to the Los Angeles Rams. We know Tyler Higbee is going to be there. I believe they still have Colby Parkinson under contract. But if they're selecting a tight end in the top 100, I think he's going to be a priority in their plans moving forward. And I trust McVay to get the most out of more of a raw tight end, I would say, at this point in his career with Elijah Arroyo, but a ton of athletic upside.
Yeah. Elijah Arroyo if he could put things together, he could definitely be a great tight end prospect. And the problem, I think, with the landing spot now is that Devontae Adams is there in addition to Puka Nacua. So it's like that's a lot of targets that you got to compete with. But they've featured Tyler Higbee and those type of guys over the years. If you can get a better player than Tyler Higbee, then he'll probably command some targets. I'm going to go back and maybe just take the guy who's the highest remaining draft capital player on the board right now. I'll go with Isaiah Bond. I will admit, as the people who did this mock draft, I'm not in love with the landing spot and the fit that we selected here because they already have Jameson Williams and so on and so forth. But I do think that it kind of does make sense when you think about it, because Jameson Williams has more to be had as a skill set than just stretching the field. Amon-Ra St. Brown, of course, needs to be cleared out for. Sam Laporta stretches the field from the tight end position, and you have the best running back duo in the league. Having a decoy in this offense like Isaiah Bond kind of does make sense, but it is one of the best offenses in the league. So if you're going to play in a dynasty best ball league, especially, I think Isaiah Bond would be kind of interesting. Catches a long touchdown, makes some plays. Short area targets could be something that he actually feasts over the middle on as well if he can develop as a receiver. We've both said that, his best 10 plays kind of look like a Jalen Waddle Walmart version, but he has a lot to go from a young player perspective that he needs to develop a lot more to his game to be able to be anywhere near as good as Jalen Waddle.
Hey, I mean, if you're taking a guy with legit burners that has upside the way Isaiah Bond does, and an offense that, as we know, we can project very well with Detroit in the third round, I think it's a worthwhile dart to send. Speaking of worthwhile dart, I will be taking Torrey Horton here, who goes to the Seattle Seahawks at the 92nd overall pick. As we know, Seattle, they are not going to be bringing back Tyler Lockett. DK Metcalf already traded to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Sure, it's a situation where we don't want to just project immediate volume for Torrey Horton, but I do think he has the opportunity to at least establish himself as a starter in this offense from year one, especially given what we saw at Colorado State.
Yeah, and again, we'd probably be in the range where we're starting to take day 3 running backs here. If Damian Martinez, Ollie Gordon, Jaden Blue, Rashad Smith, like some of these guys, if they went to better landing spots than some of the ones that we have here, maybe we're venturing into that range. I'm going to end up taking Savion Williams, who I know this is kind of a lazy comparison, but he is a lot like the development trajectory of a Quentin Johnston type, where you get the design touches early on. Maybe you can develop into a more downfield threat. Obviously a great athlete, big, physical, all the stuff that you want to see from a player, but the prospect profile is pretty bad. And Marvin Harrison Jr. is your only real wide receiver there right now. So that's kind of why I like the Savion Williams fit, is that you could use a guy to go along with Harrison and McBride, who are going to be your leading 2 targets. And of course, you have the 2-headed backfield there as well.
Yep. And at the 311 here, I will be selecting somebody that actually eats less food than Corey, weighs in less than Corey on the scale every morning. And that's going to be Tej Johnson going to the Jets. Yeah, he is very light, to put it simply. He's a very light person. He's a very light football player. But he does have an opportunity here if he got 73rd overall draft capital working with the Jets. I do think he has the opportunity to maybe establish himself. Again, I'm not saying he's Tank Dell, but if he gets top 75 capital, he's at least going to be going to get the opportunity to show if he can be a Tank Dell light in this offense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's really difficult to project him to be anything much more than like a gadget Tutu Atwell type. But like you said, Tank Dell does exist, and we do have to put maybe the 10% chance that he turns into a route runner savant like Tank Dell turns into, because he can run routes, and he is a very productive prospect coming out of Oregon. And he also...
Don't put hands on him, though.
Yeah, do not put hands on him. He needs free releases out of the slot in his entire career. And Pat Bryant to the Packers was the final player in this draft. Again, we did the classic Green Bay Packers thing where they have Wicks, they have Dobbs, they have Jaden Reed, they add Trey Harris and Pat Bryant, and they'll just let them duke it out in training camp by the looks of it, because we have no idea who's going to emerge as the best receivers from this core until Christian Watson comes back as well. But if you think about it from like a financial planning perspective or a asset allocation, Dontavian Wicks, Romeo Doubs, Christian Watson, you're going to have to make financial decisions on those players pretty soon. So maybe reloading with 2 receivers on day 2. And we saw them do this with tight ends too. We saw them do it with Tucker Kraft and Luke Musgrave as well.
Yeah, and I think the theory here would be Pat Bryant has that 6'3" size. Ideally, he'd be that long-term replacement on the outside for a guy like Christian Watson. Trey Harris kind of more in that body style of a guy like Dontavian Wicks. Maybe he's just a more reliable version of that. That would be your theory there, that if you can hit on 2 guys with differing skill sets, you have Jayden Reed working from the slot, that your overall sum of the parts is going to look like how you did when you ultimately upset the Cowboys in the first round of the playoffs 2 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. And again, Gordon, Martinez, these guys would be off the board probably way before a guy like Pat Bryant if we knew the draft capital, but we're operating off of a 3-round NFL mock draft. Again, if you enjoyed this video, leave a like, subscribe, all that good stuff. We did our own 3-round NFL mock draft and then mocked the mock draft in a Dynasty Superflex rookie mock draft as well. Gave them some nutted landing spots that we would love to see from a fantasy perspective. If you disagree, agree, leave it down below. If you want all of our rookie rankings, we have our top 30 rookies written up, graded in our draft guide. Top 60 rookies will be live April 1st. Prospect model stuff. Get your team reviewed from us. You can get like a 6 to 10 minute team review of us breaking down your Dynasty roster, breaking down all the decisions that you have to make, just like we do in Dynasty Decisions episodes. You can get that for free if you sign up right now on flockfantasy.com and use the promo code FSE, and you sign up for an annual Mother Flocker package. You'll get a free voucher to get a team review from us. You can also purchase those a la carte. Buy, sell, hold report. You also get a free voucher for that, and you can purchase those a la carte. And of course, when you guys are watching this, we are filling out our listener league today. So make sure you guys check that out, and you will get bonus ballots if you are a site subscriber. So check that out if you guys are interested. That'll be linked down below in the description. But with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.